Well, welcome back to Side Quest 16 and the beginning of something new. The beginning of Final Fantasy VII. Squaresoft's, what was it? I think 1997 smash hit. And well, I guess I should welcome guest, Mr. Wesley Shantz, and then we also have a second guest joining us to host this, Mr. Vincent Reese. Mr. Wesley Shantz, good to hear from you.
Hi. I want to hear from Vince now and see if he's really here.
Is Vince really here? Well, Vince is not really here yet because he has not accepted the invitation.
Wait, I heard some music playing in the background though. Somebody's playing Final Fantasy.
Yeah, I've got the music on in the background just to augment what it is we're doing here. But I know Vince hasn't yet mastered the technology, so perhaps the call is just sitting there and
Oh,
is this our enigmatic third guest, Mr. Vincent Reese?
Am I on? And am I live right now?
yeah.
You are live.
Oh,
Welcome.
my dude.
And so just like, I suppose it's funny, it's just like a metaphor. Just as I joined first and Wes second, and we prepared the way for you to join third like the Timaeus, here you are now, Vince. And welcome.
Mhm.
Welcome to a project that we've just now gotten started and need your speciality in order to finish.
Yeah.
So Vince, so just to get going, just because, this first minute's always sort of an awkward minute, let's just sort of hear what your last year of life has been like, because something we're claiming with the viewers here is that you're enigmatic, and all the viewers and listeners, they really know about Wes and me. Wes has got, he just had a wedding, and he's been teaching, and he's been going through Earthbound on his podcast. And I've been doing this and the Iliad and doing Hayao Miyazaki with Wes. So everybody knows us. We're old news. Why don't you tell the listeners just a little bit about yourself, and then we can get into this. And then maybe also tell them a little bit why you agreed to play Final Fantasy VII and talk about it with us.
Great game. So I'm essentially the youngest brother going on his wandering 20s. Don't think I've been in a place consistently for longer than maybe 2 years, with the exception of college.
Mm-hmm.
And, I'll just buy a motorcycle and ride until it breaks down, and that's where I will stay.
That's perfect. So you sound just like our protagonist here. You're sort of a disoriented young blonde individual who doesn't know where he belongs in the world and rides on a motorcycle doomed to fail.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Like completely atomized, without history, potentially without future. Let's just say I'm hoping that I'll get dumped into some Mako and find out who I am.
Yeah, very good. Well, without knowing who you are before getting dumped into the Mako, perhaps it becomes even harder to figure out who you are. Cloud. But okay, let's talk about this game a little bit. So first and foremost, I have to say I have a lot of respect for you, Wes, for analyzing a game in the first place. So even though I started the podcast with a book, you started with a game, and I have to say there's just so much more to analyze and to look at in a game. I mean, for one, there's the name, Final Fantasy. The Final Fantasy, which seems sort of like a contradiction in terms because there's a number after it, 7.
Right.
So how could it possibly be final? The second thing is it's called a fantasy game. And from the intro on, this seems to be a highly technological society. It seems more like a science fiction sort of game. And we've talked a little bit about potential distinctions between science fiction and fantasy, though it seems like that distinction might be blended here. But there are other things to think about, too. It's a certain style of game, a role-playing game. There's a leveling up feature. There are menus that you have to access. You have hit points. You fight enemies in a very specific way. There are boss enemies that require additional strategy. You have a sprite as well as CGI, and it's just how much there is. I guess it's not even a question that I have for you, Wes, so much as I'm very impressed. Well, the question would be, where do you start when you're analyzing a game?
I've taken the route of saying I hope that the listeners have some background playing the game that I'm talking about. I assume they do, or else they wouldn't listen in the first place. Or
Right.
if they don't, then they don't really necessarily care about all that stuff too much, all the
Sure.
ins and outs of the technology. And that's not my expertise. Like there are people who can go into a lot of detail and explain those things and how they work and some of the mechanics and development aspects of the game. But what I try to do with it is read it, like a text, almost like a book that I really like and want to talk about, and then I get to talk about the things that I like about it, which is the best of all possible worlds, right? So there's something in what was said a minute ago, which might be helpful for people to hear about a little bit, is that if Vince is kind of like Cloud, is what we're saying, then does that make
Makes you
does that make
Eris.
no, I wasn't going that way. I agree. I agree with that. But no, but I was gonna say, does that make St. John's soldier, right? Like what's your soldier experience then, Vince?
Oh, soldier experience. Well, the running joke is that what's the original guy's name? Can't even remember it.
Sephiroth?
No. The one that
Zach.
Zach. Yeah.
Zach.
Yeah.
So I essentially Schmied has been the Zach. And he's somehow died at some point in our relationship.
True.
And I carry forward the false memories and imago, if you will, of Zach as my own.
Okay.
All right. Well, that's so that's yeah. Wes, go on.
Now that we've got that straightened out, yeah, like I say, there's way too many things to go into all of them, but there's some point at which the game is sort of like highlighting certain things that clearly it thinks are important, and then there's like memories and things that I have of playing the game where those are the things that I guess I must have thought were important, and then I sort of bridge those into all the stuff that I'm interested in now, like philosophy and politics and science and poetry. And so I just sort of like try to bring all those things together and draw the connections as much as possible. And I just hope that it's interesting to the people who might or might not be listening, I guess.
Well, my man, can I ask something about how you got into the game? Into the games, I guess. So the most daunting thing that I'm seeing right now is just how to look at the visual aspect of the game. How do you analyze that? Because it's different from logos. It's different from Word. You have almost like it's more than a movie because of the player's interaction with it and the movement throughout the world. So how do you approach the visual aspect and the movement within the visual aspect?
Let me jump in on that before I let you answer that, Wes, just
Go
because something I think that's strange that I've run into as I've started to interpret the game is sort of the interplay between the subjective and the objective aspect of playing. On the one hand, there is the game that everybody has the shared experience playing, sort of like you have a shared experience reading. But on the other hand, you have sort of a subjective experience because you are the one making the choices, even though they're fairly prescribed and playing. So I have a real difficulty between, and perhaps this is why all reading is rereading and you have to read twice. And you measure twice and cut once, is because I find myself really switching between those two modes. The playing mode, where I'm sort of the subjective character being borne along by the story, but also the objective mode where I'm trying to see what it is that is happening and to derive the information from it. So both as a player and a commentator at the same time. Wes?
Yeah, no, I think that's one of the most interesting things that playing games or reading books does, right? Is it teaches you, I don't know if you want to call it a method or just like an attitude or perspective where you see the distance between those two things and you start to notice, well, if I see that distance, then other people have seen it too, and they've probably thought about this a lot, and then so then you start to kind of really enter into that conversation on that reflective level. But then the game is great because it seems to prioritize the playing, the subjective, the flow of being in the moment of it, and that's what's sort of fun about playing, right? You lose yourself, and that is hard to talk about in a way that doesn't sound sort of banal or like just sort of slippery, but it's definitely essential, and it's just worth like throwing that out there.
Well, it's something like Vince was saying before we got on air, like when we were first setting up this project. Both partners in this project. We all serve the ideal. We are ourselves just parts of the whole. But what he was sort of saying is he was like, oh man, you guys want to get sucked into that game. And I thought that was a really great comment to make, because it's like, that is the power of the narrative and of narrative itself, right? It can suck you in. You can go down the rabbit hole, as it were. And so sort of this experience is us both going down the rabbit hole while also keeping in mind that we are down the rabbit hole. So we also have sort of a third perspective, not only the sort of objective, what is happening perspective, as Vince has been exploring through playthroughs, which is something I'd like to talk about, the difference between playing and watching a playthrough, because I know so many people have watched their friend play this game or have done this with an RPG, but also the aspect of being able to view yourself being sucked in during the game. And having to sort of, or being capable of actually striking that balance now, because obviously we're all adults with relationships and jobs, and we also have a goal.
Yeah,
not
we're
just
all
play to have fun.
NPCs essentially.
Well, we're getting there. Maybe we're boss battles, but so let me just dive in here. There were 3 parts to this first playthrough that I really wanted to talk about this time around, and we played through the very beginning of the game, through the first boss, to the first meeting back at Avalanche, where we meet Tifa, the young friend / potentially lover of Cloud, who is from his hometown. And so just a few parts that I'd like to think of. First is the intro with the harp, and the zooming in and the zooming out and the seeing the stars, but the stars are actually snow, and the snow is going up, but it's actually going down. And then Ares, who's going to be sort of, at least for this first disc, and this is one of the first games that employed the use of multiple discs for PlayStation, which added to the gravity of it. Just what an amazing game. So much information, multiple discs, my goodness. And she's going to be sort of a divine anima sort of figure, a sort of woman who is the ultimate woman in some way, and also an aspect of the Great Mother. So just to mention this, from the very beginning, we see 3 major themes. One is what you think you see is not necessarily what is actually there. What's down and up, potentially not correct. Cloud as soldier, as someone who doesn't care, potentially not correct. This woman as poor slum selling flower girl, of course, sometimes being a metaphor for someone who sells her own flower, a prostitute. So there's an interesting connection there, and also a connection to Mary Magdalene, of course, as another great mother figure, but also a connection between that which is beauty in nature and the ugliness of technology, because this Midgard that we see, which is, of course, the name of Middle Earth from the Norse mythology, is ugly. It is, but it also is a symbol of the self, or of perfection, because it's a circle, like Plato's soul from the Timaeus. And so we see an interplay between technology and nature, in the same way that we're going to see an interplay between science and fantasy, or science fiction and fantasy. And I suppose the last 2 things would be, I would like to understand the interplay between Cloud and the red light that he viewed, and right before the first boss, that manifested in words that then warned him against something. It makes me wonder about what Vince was saying when he talks about somebody being impressed by another and sort of taking on the destiny and the attributes of another person, whether that's something that's actually happened in this text or in this game. And then when Cloud and Tifa are talking, Cloud, and this is a flashback when they're young, after they meet together back at their hideout, which is a bar in the slums of Midgard, he says he wants to be like the great Sephiroth, and he wants to join Soldier. And so a theme I would like to consider today, but also just in general, would be the interplay of you and what your dream is, and your pursuit of that dream, and how it affects you, if you do not realize it.
Well, really quick, I'd like to ask a question just to clarify for firstly me and secondarily the other listeners out there in the ether. You said this red light, which happens after they shut off the Mako reactor, and then this voice, this text dialogue box shows up, warning Cloud or perhaps the party of this approaching scorpion monstro. Now, it sounded like you were saying that this might not be an external dialogue box. It is an internal dialogue box only heard by Cloud, and is that what you were saying?
That would be my initial suggestion, specifically given what it says.
Okay, because
careful. This is not an ordinary Mako reactor. I'm not sure why the Mako reactor itself would give that warning to somebody. It seems as if something in his unconscious or like something occurs to him that maybe he can't understand. It doesn't prevent him from making the mistake of or of conducting the action of trying to blow up the Mako reactor. But it does seem like it's a prefiguration or a foreshadowing of there being sort of a splinter in the mind of Cloud.
Yeah, absolutely.
And something that might expand with time. Yeah, go on.
That dialogue box was always, I'm going off of memory right now. The retro gaming joint I usually hit up didn't open till 12 because I don't know. But it was always mysterious because that dialogue box is really the only dialogue box in my memory that happens before a boss fight that isn't, say, another party member speaking about the situation. So your interpretation seems like it's already getting to Cloud's last name, Strife, that there is this fracturing of the psyche within this, I would argue, perverted cosmos of Midgard. But no, that's interesting. That's already a pretty tight observation, my dude.
Well, and something that I'm going to probably try and push while we go through this is somebody that Wes and I have listened to a lot is this contemporary psychologist, Jordan B. Peterson. He takes a concept from Jean Piaget called the zone of proximal development. He says that that's how adults relate to children, especially coaches, parents, and teachers. That you always give them a task slightly beyond their initial abilities. And so that dialogue box, and I'll say Sephiroth in general, as a figure of the self conflated with the shadow, seems to himself be a representation of the zone of proximal development. The thing which pushes you into the next situation that you're not yet prepared for, but if you engage with it, perhaps you can succeed at. And right before the first boss, the first big challenge, that strikes me as sort of exactly how you would feel, right? Like before you go on stage for the first time to sing, or before the first time you go up to hit for a baseball game, that nervousness that just is sort of a shock that can be prohibitive to you, or before you even get onto a podcast for the first time and speak your thoughts live for everybody to not listen to in the first hand, but eventually criticize if we're successful. But Wes, we've said quite a few things here, and I know that's, we're, since it's lunchtime, it seems like we're laying out a buffet for people to choose from. But I know, and that's, go on.
So one thing that I noticed about that part of the game is that right before that you pick up your first materia also, right? And it's the restore materia, and you don't know what that is when you start playing the game, and you're not even allowed to do anything with it yet because there's like a whole tutorial about how to do that happens after. And so that's kind of interesting that it's juxtaposed there. We learn later like sort of what goes on with Mako and materia, but for now it's just like, oh, here's this other like magical thing that I know nothing about. And now, oh, the screen is red and it's telling me, watch out. So there's something interesting where it's like, there's much more going on than we really understand as we're starting to play. And that's like kind of, we're supposed to get the sense that Cloud knows more than what he's letting on, like he's got this experience as a soldier with whether that's an acronym or just like a capitalized for some reason word.
Right.
But anyway,
Yeah,
he's ex-soldier, and now he's with Avalanche, and Avalanche are trying to take down the Mako reactors and save the planet, this and that. But it's like he tries to put off this persona that he's like, doesn't care, he's above it all. And so it's interesting that he would get this red flash warning, which is a combination of, as Vince was saying earlier, right, like a kind of like liminal thing between logos, the word, reason, and just like impressions of sight and light and sound and feeling, right? So it's a really interesting moment. The boss fight is kind of underwhelming, right? Because
that was the scariest
the first
thing
fight
12-year-old Vince had ever seen, dude.
Yeah.
Don't discount that. It's probably still going to be the scariest thing.
But what happens though, right, Vince, is like the stronger the attack the thing uses, like if you do mess up and hit it and it shoots its laser out of its tail, it just gives you a limit break like right away, and then you kill it. Like it really, the limit break is really, we can talk about that another time. But anyway, so like that's what I was thinking about with that, is like, okay, so how does materia, and I think this leads us back to the Eris scene in the beginning as well, right? So this kind of like microcosm macrocosm thing going on in there.
Yeah. Let me add to that. So we have we learn about materia, which we don't quite understand yet. We run into a boss that we have to learn how to, and this is something that you said, we have to learn patience in order to correctly fight him. Then we learn something new about ourselves, the fact that we have a limit break and can use that as well. And so I think that's all strong evidence that perhaps what the game is itself, but certainly these first moments is a representation of how to act in a situation where known territory has dissipated, where there are now unknown tools or tools that you do not know the function of you now gain access to, that will be useful in soon future events that you don't necessarily, that themselves foreshadow the existence of those events, as if a goal makes the tools necessary to achieve it appear in the first place. But that makes me oh no, there was another question I really wanted to ask about. Oh no, it's popped out of my head. I'm sorry. So that's what I had to say for that moment.
So really quick, I'd also like to recap, just briefly get it into like a crystallization of what we talked about. So with the appearance of this dialogue box, because I'm currently fascinated by that, we have three options on the table. We of course know these because we have played through the game, and if you're not a chump, you have beaten the game. You have one first individual that came up as who this voice might be the sort of introjecting personality of Sephiroth, who we'll learn more about later.
Or at least Cloud's perception of Sephiroth.
Yes.
Because we find out just after this that Sephiroth is the ideal in the same way that Soldier is sort of like an ideal to these peons, this avalanche that Cloud is talking to. And I think that's an important element. Cloud clearly looks down on the people he's working with.
Yeah. So the second option that we have would be Zack, that there's some sort of spiritual entity of Zack that remains after his death. We, of course, only know this from later on in the game, that he takes on this persona.
And he is actually wearing the same sword and
hairstyle,
even uniform and hairstyle as Zack. Yeah, he looks very similar. And what the power of Genova, which is a mistranslation of Jehovah, which is something interesting about this Japanese to English game.
Final Root Fantasy.
Right. And all the swearing, and that'll be, I mean, there's so many interesting aspects to get in. So you were saying it could be Sephiroth, it could be Zack.
And then there's a third that my man Wes brought up, was that this could, instead of being, say, a internal psychic entity of Cloud, that this is rather, and again, we find this out later, as Wes pointed out, this could be the materia speaking to Cloud in its crystallization of the spirit force of the world. Spoilers, guys. Materia is us.
We'll have to see. Well, so I want to get to a meaty question here. So Cloud's name is Cloud Strife, and if you put Cloud plus Strife together, that's a storm. And in fact, that will be the name of the protagonist for Final Fantasy VIII, Squall. And so essentially, Cloud is a stormy sort of character. His hair's even stormy, right? It's like lightning bolts shooting out of his head. Sort of a typical anime style hairdo there, if anybody thinks of Dragon Ball Z. But also, he's a part of a group called Avalanche. And what is an avalanche? Well, it is, because of a large noise being caused, a tremendous cascading force of snow and whatever it picks up, destructively destroying that which is down in its path. And so what's interesting about them as a rebel group is that they are functionally considered terrorists, not only by Shinra, who controls the news, but by those around them. What they do is they attack Mako reactors because they, like environmentalists, believe that the Mako reactors are sucking the life force out of the Earth. And well, so perhaps that does warrant the Mako reactors being destroyed. But something that they do in this first mission is they attack during the day. And something that one of the characters that you can talk to right before you have your first meeting back with Avalanche in the slums is he says, yeah, Avalanche, the thing is, I don't know why they didn't attack at night when nobody would have been there.
Because they're studs.
And well, so something you find out is that these Avalanche rebels are terrorists in that respect. That even though, like Aquinas might say, they're fighting against unjust laws that are no longer laws, they are also trespassing upon some natural laws here, because it's not a wartime situation they find themselves in. It's a local civil situation. And even though I suppose you can justify that those people who work for Shinra, which I suppose is the vast majority of people who have jobs in this sort of tyrannical society, deserve death for what they're doing to the planet. But if they could just as well have made this attack at night and spared these individuals, a real question that I have about them, and perhaps, a real foreshadowing of the game to our current situation, is what is A, are Avalanche terrorists? And B, what is the appropriate relationship between saving the world but also sparing the humans that might get in your way?
So who are the humans, though, that we encounter in this first Mako reactor?
The guards, right?
Guards, yeah.
Yeah, so they're in how I'm viewing this is what's now coming out is striking is that there are no workers. Mm-hmm. There are no either civilians or workers present at the Mako reactor.
But that's only because your interest as a fighting character moving forward is with the soldiers. Like, you don't have any interest in talking. Like, there's a streamlined version of what's happening.
Oh, no.
It's a giant Mako reactor. It's like those workers are present.
We're only
but
seeing,
you just don't see them.
We're only seeing a small function of it. But even at the gate checks, they're absent. And
Well, you're given a sense that this is sort of abandoned at first. You don't really know what you're doing as you get into the game. It's only after you've destroyed it, you have the single-minded focus when you start, right? You're on this train, you jump off, you're fighting, you're into it. And only after you've destroyed the Mako reactor do you find out innocent people have died due to what you have done.
Huh. All right.
Yeah.
And
the way the fighting is structured is interesting because sometimes you can see the enemy before you fight. And sometimes you can't. Sometimes you're just walking around exploring, and then suddenly the screen will sort of like swirl and blur, and then you're in the fight scene. Mm-hmm. And that's sort of like, I think, mirrors kind of what you're talking about, where like you only see certain things. It's like you don't get to see the whole picture, and the camera is not something you can move around, right? The camera's fixed. It follows you, but it doesn't like show you a first person view where you can like look around and see stuff. So it's a stylized kind of fight system, and it's a stylized approach to the whole adventure thing. It's like almost schematized. and bringing it down to a level that's like giving you, like you say, the feeling of being this character, but not to the point that you are like in a verisimilitude relationship to everything.
Right.
Um,
Right.
and the
right. Interesting. Yeah. Go on.
no, the way that I thought about this too is like the game doesn't start you looking at Cloud. The game starts you looking at the stars, which turn out to
Yes.
be what Eris is looking at. And so I found that like a cinematic touch there really, really interesting. What do you guys think about that? Why start the game that way?
Well, the first thing that comes to mind is that when we're looking at stars, again, the foreshadowing towards the future, what do we know that comes from the stars later?
Meteor.
And Genova.
Right.
So Genova has already this appearance within the storyline, although it's veiled. The main antagonist, the one that pushes the story forward, Genova through Sephiroth, already has an appearance.
Well, and even at a symbolic level, it may be a comment on the fact that we spend so much time rooted to the earth looking at the stars, and that so many of our problems come from precisely that, missing where the action of life is at and staring at the stars. If you consider Genova a psychic phenomenon, like a virus of thought, like the overcoming of one's personality by pride or arrogance, like a fallen star, like a Lucifer, that falls from heaven and causes itself a fall from grace.
Well,
which perhaps, go on.
To put it in Daddy Young's own lingo, it rings heavily to me in the way that you were describing it, but just to get into this sort of depth psychology vocabulary, just pinnacle and absolute power complex in the fact that Sephiroth seeks to redesign the world through his own image. And nothing outside of that image can exist. It's a very totalitarian view of the world, of the cosmos.
Yes. Yeah. I agree with that. But also just in this particular instance, suggesting that it's the exploratory aspect. That this is just another aspect that's interesting. That as if you're looking for all the answers to the world by looking to the stars. But if the stars are themselves representations of thoughts within the mind, the best way to explore the stars is not by going to the stars or looking at the stars, but by bringing the stars into the world, by embodying the thoughts. That one explores thoughts and thus the universe best, not by leaving the world, but by engaging with the world. That you can never understand the power of a thought insofar as it's simply left in your head, or understand the power of a story insofar as it's not spoken. That it's only when the feet are on the ground and the roots are digging in that you have a legitimate experience. It's almost like a metaphor for the act of the story itself, that what starts out in potential and potency is then made actual and real by humans, and their relations to each other. Not to try and get too metaphorical, but what do you guys think about that? Or what do you have to add to that or subtract in this case?
No, I think that's a pretty good like outline of kind of what's going on there. I like that it's in the it turns out to be this like little glimpse of beauty and light. It's down a dark alleyway, right? And she kind of, her heels click and it's silent and it's the only sound, and then suddenly it's like this loud car thingy drives by, clunking along. And so it's like this kind of like I said before, microcosm there of the whole game. It's like there's this beautiful thing that's being encroached upon by darkness and noise on all sides, but it doesn't detract from it. And in some sense, it's like it's an instantiation of, like you were saying, Vince, like this this kind of spirit thing that powers even the oppressive regime, right? The regime itself is drawing upon this power that it doesn't understand to do something that it knows not what it does, sort of thing.
So I'm going to be like the force of banality here, just be this critical negative force right now. We've all been in a city at any point in our lives. Like, Alex, you always talk about how you were born in San Francisco. You know what it looks like. You look up at the sky in a city at night, right? What do you see?
Right. One star, maybe Mars right now.
Yeah. So whoever was in charge, because Mars is in retrograde. Watch out, guys.
Mars is bright right now.
Whoever was in charge of this design, like, obviously wasn't paying too much attention.
Well, it turns out not to be stars, right? It's our own mistake, and something, and just as we've been talking about what we can see and what we can't see because of the fixedness of perception, but also something that we find out soon is that those in the slums, part of being poor is that you can't even see the light of the sun. So it's not so much that you just don't have access to resources in an economic way, but even you don't even have access to the same perspective as those above you. You don't even have access to seeing the natural phenomena that can perhaps symbolically represent the infinitude of existence, that there's an element of being trapped. And so this is actually a very interesting thing about how this game starts, as opposed to, say, many major role-playing games. Rather than simply being in your hometown, you are not in your hometown. This is your work town, and we find out about your hometown, which is called Nibelheim, another sort of German Norse name. Any Heim. I think it means village in Norse. It must mean something like that. And so you're not in your normal home, but rather than being in sort of a comforting, safe place that is estuary-like, that you must now leave in order to face the dangers of the world, like how a small bird must leave the nest, or like a small human must make it on his own, Vince. And you're in sort of an oppressive prison-like place. It's as if the idea of the initial states of consciousness that you need to break out of in order to go from, say, group identified member to individual or child to adult is sort of an act of breaking out of an egg, like a bird. That what we're going to have to do in order to get this full perspective, to see the world as it is, rather than just this city, which is our initial world, is we're going to have to break out. We're going to have to expand our perspective. And that's not going to be a passive endeavor, because most people in the slums, and this is a quote I actually wrote down, because Cloud said, he says, nobody chooses to be in the slums. Nobody makes that choice. And so, well, it's like, okay, well, then what's the opposite of that? Choosing to get out of the slums. And so I think there's a sort of a self-responsibility a motif that's right there in the beginning. And also, but I think it's sophisticated, because obviously the Avalanche is trying to affect change, but they're making big mistakes. Killing innocent people is not a small mistake. And it's not going to get, I think that also prefigures their eventual failure, at least by the methodology they've taken as terrorists. That even though they have the right idea, potentially, that's only the start. You have to act it out correctly. You have to embody it. You have to take responsibility for the consequences. Well, and there will be, go on.
So something you mentioned brought an idea to my head. I can't remember exactly what it was, but we open up in not just a work town. We open up in an underworld. We open up, if we want to expand this sort of free association that I'm doing right now, we open up in a hell in which you have these shades of people walking around, not fully human, perhaps not even fully dead yet, but they exist.
Well, not fully human in that they can't manifest the logos because they don't have a fuller perspective.
Yeah.
I think that's good. Go on.
So with that, what kind of hell is this? It in the imagery, it's pretty obvious that it's underneath the sun. There is this upper crust world that does enjoy the sun, and then there's these underground denizens, but it's not a spiritual place.
Right. It's very physical. It's very like Homer's under. It's also like Dante's.
Yeah. Yeah, it's physical. These people live here, breathe there, fuck, die, all of that. So, one, what are those people doing there? And I'm going to bring in sort of hopefully I'd call it, although I wouldn't stick by this, maybe a capitalist realist view of this. That these people are living in a fully industrialized society. They're only the underground dwellers. They're only there to serve as maybe a reserve labor pool for Shinra, which is the only seemingly employer in town. So
its name means God, so probably that's true.
Yeah.
And they recently won a war against a neighboring people. So that's also interesting. A corporation has just defeated a country or a city called Wutai.
Yeah.
So something that sort of the anti-capitalists, with various weak arguments these days, sort of lay forth is that corporations are evil and that the market is a terrible place. It's like, the free market is literally the embodiment of all the collective free wills of everybody who exists. And of course, as we know from Warren Farrell, something like 85% of home shopping decisions are made by women. So it's the free choice of women mostly expressing themselves and creating massive wealth within the world. And I mean, a question I would well ask is, what's the difference in speed between snail mail and email? And perhaps that's what the difference between the market and something socialist is. But the question I'm really interested in here is Shinra actively seeking to oppress these poor? And this is going to U.S. Or are they simply? I mean, this is a very hard question. Or are they simply, like Peterson has claimed, reading economics? Is it simply the case that they're, insofar as there is a vastly wealthy people, regardless of whether it's egalitarian or totalitarian, there will be a lower class. There will be a people who do not have access to that which everybody has, regardless of your best intents. So I guess my question is, are these people in this terrible situation because of Shinra or because of the fact of inequality in human society?
Okay. I mean, I would say yes to your question. Yes, Shinra is oppressive because I think, like you said before, they control the media,
right?
And they are putting out a very limited kind of story about it. Anyway, the other thing that we see in this game, which I think is pretty cool, is the posters and the magazine billboards for movies, and there's a ton of advertising. Loveless is the big movie, I guess, of the season.
It's a play. It's from Crisis Core, which I'm not going to talk about a lot here. That's play.
Loser.
It is the play that Sephiroth's friend and soldier Genesis is always quoting. It's like the famous stage play that's going on at that time.
It's
the
like
Broadway play.
It's the it's a society which is less than perfectly free, I guess. It's clear that people come to this city from other places, though, right? They're drawn to it. Cloud to work for Soldier, perhaps out of a misguided ideal of his hero Sephiroth, the great fighter, but also Tifa, for reasons we don't fully understand yet, has come to the city. And Barret, I think we've got to talk about Barret at least a little bit. We hear more about. I want to say about him, though. We learn about his story later. We never really of his motivations for joining this movement, but we never really see. And this makes your question hard to answer. We never really see the background of the Shinra bosses and like what they're about, really. Like, what are they trying to accomplish? The villains always get short shrift in these kind of things, which is,
But I think you do hint at something. We will get a small insight into that through the figure of Kate Sith at some point. So we will at least get an antagonism or a conflict of morals between those who are the Shinra High Guard or Board in this case, which is very interesting. Yeah, go on.
We will also get, and I'm not because right now I'm still trying to figure out how we are playing this game of discussion, how much we want to bring up that will occur in the future of the game. But we will have not a look at an individual villain within Final Fantasy VII, within the Shinra Corporation. We will have a look at sort of the ideology of Shinra, or maybe their experimentation with Genova through this Dr. Mengele character that we encounter, I think, in the second disc. Yeah.
Hojo or Gast? Which one? Yeah. The original is Gast, Professor Gast, and then Hojo's the one Sephiroth looks down upon.
Yeah, so my memory is failing me right now, but whichever one does the actual human experimentations on Sephiroth's mother.
Okay, yeah, I think that may be both of them. Gast was at least still alive.
Yeah.
At that time. I think he had the original research idea. Hojo may have carried it through.
So maybe all I'm trying to do at that point is introduce it right now, that we will have a unveiling, maybe not through these individual strong villain types who give this dissertation on why they're doing this potentially evil stuff, but it will be gathered throughout, and oftentimes with such expanses of time in between that you can't put the pieces together without maybe going back to replay, or just reading the Wikipedia page,
right, or watching a playthrough, which I do want to ask you about. But so Wes, you mentioned that you want to talk about Barret, and so maybe the first thing we can do is talk about well, first, his physical description. Barret seems to be clearly African American, and he's larger than any of the other characters.
Correction, sir. There is no America in Final Fantasy.
That's a good point.
Africa.
But it is being marketed to Americans eventually, and the characters do look rather Western European. But in any case, he's the darkest skinned person there. He has a beard. He's the oldest at 35, which we're all creeping up on
Shut
now.
Up, dude.
And just because this may be the most operant point, he has a different weapon from Cloud. Cloud has the archetypal sword, a large sword, the sword of the Logos. And that sword is going to be sort of a representation of the perspective that we take with him. That which he learns and cuts with it, we will learn and cut with it. But Barret has a far more conventional sort of weapon to our sci-fi minds. He has a Gatling gun that has been grafted to his right arm. And so I suppose I want to ask both of you, but specifically Wes in this case, what do you think why is it that Barret has a gun and he's the first person you ever fight alongside, and you have a sword? Because at first I remember when I was young, that was sort of odd. I was like, can my sword block bullets? And the people we're fighting against seem to have guns as well. And I mean, on the one hand, there does seem to be this joining together, this admixture of sci-fi gun and fantasy sword. Mm-hmm. But also, I suppose Barret is sort of more long range, where Cloud is going to have to get up close in order to make damage. But what do you make of that? Why? What is this? What is this distinction in weapons? What is it supposed to tell us about their characters?
Well, yeah, I mean, we see that he's also the first one to drop some swear words which get garbled.
Yes.
And I think that's really, that as a kid struck me, much more so than the weapon thing. I was like, they can do that. I mean, it's just like a comic book, of course, but still, that was a new thing at the time, I think. And so he's a fascinating character. His gun arm thingy, like, he is a weapon,
Yes, he is a weapon.
We hear like Sephiroth being talked about, and later there's bosses which are just called weapon.
Yes, very good.
So scary.
And and then so he's the one who's got this vision. It seems quite narrow, but it's like, we blow up the reactors, we save the planet. Like, now we have an adventure, so he sort of sets the tone for everything in the beginning. But there's this funny, like, competition between him and Cloud. Like, he cares so much, Cloud tries to care so little. He goes in guns blazing. Cloud is like a little more intellectual, as you say. He's a little more surgical in some respects. But I think that it plays together really nicely, and we see that he's got this kid back at the bar, Marlene, right? He's a father
who reminds me just in memory of the girl from Monsters Inc. Does anyone else get that resonance?
Well, I think you're exactly right to understand that it's the same metaphor. It is the civilizing effect of love on a monstrous individual that a child can have. That, potentially Barret is the sort of guy that could have been a really good soldier, and we don't really know his past.
Yet,
and that's right. And so, potentially he was a sort of gnarly dude with his missing hand and Gatling gun right arm and giant bulging muscles and quick to swear and quick to fight attitude.
Yeah, he's so fucking thick.
But now he's fighting, on the side of good, so he thinks, but he's got the right idea again. He's got the right goal. But like Wes, you said, he has a very simplistic way of going about achieving that goal. So whether he's doing good or not is a real question. And I also like that there's antipathy between Cloud and Barret at first. That they Tifa even brings it up. Did you guys fight again? Because they're always fighting, because Barret doesn't trust Cloud, because Cloud's motivation is, I don't care about you, just give me money. Where Barrett's is like, I can't understand how you could want money when we're trying to save the world right now.
Well,
yeah.
So one thing, I'll have to wait until I get the game again. Those degenerates.
And so just so the listeners know, you have been watching the playthroughs, right?
Yeah. I mean, I visit the Wikipedia page like every month. It's what a good game.
But haven't you even been watching on YouTube other players playing through the game?
Yeah, like especially Emerald Weapon and all that ish. Like, because I could never beat Emerald Weapon.
I beat Emerald, but never Ruby.
Yeah. So while we're characterizing Barret as maybe to get some mythological resonances going on as an Enkidu, where so you like that.
So a beast man.
And you have maybe I wouldn't characterize Cloud at all like Gilgamesh.
But that might be the ideal which he's currently inflated by, but not truly identified with in action or in deed.
Yeah. And so that seems to be a very first level interpretation of this character of Barret.
First pass approximation.
Yeah.
Perfect.
So I want to look at just this appearance of Barret, how his body
Which
is
appearance?
composed.
The animated one or the sort of sprite? Because I mean they are all much larger than everybody else around.
I'm doing the cutscene Barret.
Okay, very good.
So we discussed Cloud, and I think we should also investigate the physical appearance of Twink Boy, Cloud. He's a very interesting visual composite of opposites, a very lethe figure who nonetheless is able to wield this gargantuan penis sword.
He reminds me quite a bit of Donatello's David.
Ooh.
The sort of the very small, not the great marble one that everybody knows about, but the small bronze one where he's sort of cocky with his hips akimbo with a very large sword that's too big for him.
Right?
So so what that makes me think is that sort of the destiny or the britches are too big for the character as he currently is.
Yes.
That he's not yet, that he'll have to develop before he's worthy to the task. That he's not quite there, and that maybe that's a hint. And that is a shocking thing about when you see Cloud, right? Like tiny little dude, giant sword. How's he wield it?
Back to Barret.
Yes.
So we arrive to Midgard, first scene, just disgusting mechanization everywhere. Just the most barbaric sort of use of the fantastic creations that the Industrial Revolution has brought us. And then we see Barret. We have this composite figure of human organic matter with this garish destructive potential of the industry around him. If I want to get dialectic on this, he's a union of opposites. He has in part become what he hates most. He is at least part of him, similar to the reactor around him. And in a sense, this is why I bring this up, is that he appears in this perspective to be, right now in this introduction, more complicated and more fruitful of a character than Cloud, because he's taken the opposite into himself.
You might even say, you might say that what this society does to its individuals within it is turns them into weapons in a de-individuating sort of way, just as Cloud is soldier without name, possibly an acronym. So is Barret now completely molded with the task for which for which he exists. He is himself a destructive weapon at this point. It's as if part of what he's doing, 35, second half of his life, will be, instead of honing himself into something that completely identifies with a weapon, into becoming a person or something more than his profession or his task.
Well, I would say that he's already more of a person than Cloud might be.
Well, that's certainly true. We'll find out.
He has love, and he also, his introduction is as part of a community. Cloud is sort of this wandering spirit who goes to where the money is, and without any history except that Tifa knows. But he begins to be fleshed out even more. Just right now, he's he's hovering above the earth, if we want to use that imagery. He's not connected, whereas Barret, what's that guy's name? Biggs?
Biggs and Wedge from Star Wars.
Yeah. Star Wars reference.
We can't forget those who fall so early in this game. They live amongst each other in this very human, albeit underworldly, community.
Totally. It's underneath the jukebox. I love that. Right? The game is. It's so cool. Yeah. I want to say too, Barrett's got the money for Marlene's schooling, and that's what he pays Cloud with after they have their conversation, right? So,
that's sort of an interesting choice right there, isn't it? How do you change the world? Pay the soldiers in order to destroy the prevailing order, or teach the youth?
Right.
So we got two teachers right here. I mean, I've retired. What do you guys think?
Well, look, I would love to teach this game as part of a class. I think it would be like really something that kids would connect with and learn a lot from. So yeah. Pay me
absolutely.
Or don't pay me. I would do that. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I think we're in the process of doing that now. We're collecting our notes on this, and y'all, we've already gone for about an hour now. So I guess what I might do is ask, are there any final bits you two want to talk about? Obviously, we're going to miss a lot all the time, but there's going to be about a 20-part segment. So things we miss, we can always loop back around to. And as we continue to converse, these themes will continue to develop, and we'll see more and more. So there's never any rush to say everything. We'll have time. But and the second question would be, where would y'all like to play to next time?
Damn.
Where would be do we want to get out of Midgard, or do we maybe want to get to the final mission in Midgard, or deeper into the slums? What do y'all think? Wes, maybe I'll let you get this one. How far are you, Wes? I'm just as far as we're supposed to be.
Yeah, same.
Where are we supposed to be?
I played for about an hour and got to the part where you're done talking and you've done this cutscene about the promise, and now you're free to explore Sector 7 or whatever you're in.
Yes.
And I think if we play for about an hour or so each time, that's probably good,
Okay. Okay, so get through the ghost graveyard and on into the next things that are happening.
Mm-hmm.
Sure. Perfect. Okay, good. I'm already forgetting what. Oh, yes. My first question is is there anything else that we wanted to quickly touch on? I wrote down some notes, but it's a lot of what we talked about. Cloud and Barret getting into a fight. Oh, well, I guess one thing, and this is such a mundane thing to end on, but perhaps it's great. Something that I always enjoy hearing from you, Wes, when I listen to Bookworm Games, is you talking about the interactions you have with the NPCs, the non-player characters, who you can just go up to and talk to, and you can walk into their houses, and they're sometimes like, "Why are you in my house?" And and Earthbound sort of inverts this theme. But something interesting in this game is just the tone, the music.
Yeah.
It was the first thing we all talked about, and we didn't talk about it on the podcast, which is shameful, I know. But the music sets the tone, the harp at the beginning, and then sort of the music while you're in the slums of there's a darkness, a gloominess to it. And there's a gloominess even to all the people while there's still a faint hope within them. Like the train conductor you get a chance to talk to talks about the joys and the sorrows of life. You talk to a couple eventually near your hideout where the mom says, "I was so annoyed by my son when he was here, but now I miss him when he's gone." All these sort of nuggets of wisdom. When you're first going through as a kid, you're like, "Oh, that's like a boring whatever thing to say." But what's being said by these characters are facts that or are essential statements that real humans would say as well, right? Like a train conductor distilling down the shape of his experience as a conductor for many years into, man, life is full of joy and sadness, is really quite profound. Or the idea that and here's a profound foreshadowing, the people around you right now you take for granted because you can't imagine not having them around, but the moment they're gone, you miss them for the rest of your life.
Absolutely. Yeah, it's something I always enjoyed, even as a kid playing the game, was walking around talking to everybody and getting all those little tidbits of these hints at all these lives taking place. But the part that I like about it too is the little training room where you get to walk.
Yes.
It sort of inverts that too, because it's like it makes Cloud the expert on everything, and people are asking him for advice, and he's like, "Okay, so what do you want to hear about?" And that's the game's way of like letting you learn a bunch of stuff in a little bit of a funny way. And the save point talks to you. The treasure box talks to you. The little kids learn about limit breaks, right? And you see them use magic on each other, and it's just like this light tone to it. But then, yeah, sure, when you look at it later and you know what happens as the story moves on, then it takes on a bit of pathos. That combination of humor and tragedy is, I think, a mark of sophistication as much as you could say the mark of simplicity or not being quite clear about what kind of thing this is. It's a young art form, and it's very interesting to see how it develops.
When it really sets itself up to be an art form alongside the greatest art form, the epic, because
I thought you were going to say anime.
Yeah, but what the epic can divide into are tragedies and comedies. But what an epic does is it interweaves them, just like they interweave themselves in a human life and a human soul. And so I think the nuance of it that you're catching there, that these people are making the best out of a potentially bad situation, while other people are trying to make a bad situation better, but are potentially making it worse. And that everybody is dealing with these consequences emotionally, and that not everybody necessarily, or nobody seems to know what to do to improve things, is precisely a very sophisticated note for this game to make, and potentially a major connection between the game and the soul of the people who made it. Not obviously it is a Japanese game made, and this is something we talked about with The Wind Rises, and they are encountering sort of the Western world and had been and sort of finding their place within it after having been isolated for so long, and trying to find their way within a world that is very different from what they expected, while also of course, we as Westerners are playing this game, and we're trying to understand how it fits within our particular mythos as well. It's not so much that it's like a mixed metaphor or bad, so much as all of this Western mythology, like Midgard and Nibelheim and the Midgard serpent, are appearing in this game made by Japanese people. And there seems to be sort of just a confusion between cultures of what is the new prevailing sort of world culture, or what is the new prevailing sort of mythology that is going to break through. I would say, if I were going to throw a theory down on the first day, it would be that this game, and this is why I would say it struck so many people so deeply, is representing the birth of sort of an international mythology, or is revealing some sort of underlying structure of mythology, which is true of both the Eastern mythology and the West.
Well,
and is trying.
Go ahead.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Well, and it's just trying to parse that out, what that's going to look like exactly. And so it's like a collage. It has bits and pieces from each, some Norse mythology here, some takeaway from the fantasy genre, some adding in of contemporary political and environmental questions, some Japanese motifs here, some Western motifs here. Even the city itself, Midgard, is itself a combination of those symbols. It's deeply phallic and masculine in that the Shinra building reaches up into the heavens. It's also feminine in that it's represented by a circle. It's all interconnected.
It also has a big penis gun that comes in later.
Yes.
That's right.
Yes, it certainly will. I know I'm not saying this exactly clearly because I'm being circumspect here, or I'm circumlocuting, excuse me. But that what this game seems to be trying to do is to figure out the world, or the story of the world in which we all now live, which none of us have figured out. Mm-hmm. And which is why we continue to return to this game even 21 years later after its inception.
I agree that the music is a big part of it. The music is not entirely Western, but it uses a lot of Western style and instruments and orchestration. But it's also like the thing which is not necessary to translate from one language to another. So you've got these kind of canons of hearing music, which are Western, but those in themselves are built on things which are much deeper and seemingly universal, right? Across all cultures, there's music and elements of rhythm and melody and all that. And so, yeah, that to me, like, you can just sort of hear that music and it sort of takes you back and connects you to something which does seem to be in the past and in the future, right? So not quite articulated, but in some sense hinted at there. Yeah.
Well, that's excellent. Ending on a note of that which connects us all. Well, gentlemen, this has been an excellent first mission on this first side quest into Final Fantasy VII. And hopefully we'll do, as we continue to bumble along, we'll start to do more good than harm. I think doing this about once a week would work very well for me. And so hopefully for y'all. And school starts next week, so it might have to be during the afternoon for me. But let's set a regular time soon. And, let's understand a big part of our lives together and see if we can help other people do the same.
Sounds great.
All right, guys.
All right, till next time then. See you guys.
Bye.
Bye.
The podcast you just heard was published with Anchor. Got something you want to say to the creator of this show? Send them a voice message using the Anchor app, free for iOS and Android.